Okay, so we're on Daf Samechet, Amud Aleph. We're doing, B'ezras Hashem, I'm going to do the next Amud. So we're by where it says Gufa. That's what it says, Gufa. We're going to do this bright again, Gufa. Okay, Gufa. Ben tet shanim v'yom echad ger amoni u'moavi mitzri ve'edomi kuti natin halal u'mamzer. All of those people that they're not allowed to come to Kahal once they're 9 years old plus. Shabau al kohenet levia v'Yisraelit, and they had biyah with a kohenet or levia or Yisraelit. Paslua, they make her pasul, right? The same way that they can't marry her. Anyone who cannot marry her once they reach the age of 9 years old, their biyah is considered a biyah, and they make her pasul from just a biyah, even without marriage. Rabbi Yossi Omer kol shezar'o pasul posel. Rabbi Yossi says anyone who their zera is pasul, if they have children, their children are pasul, so they're going to be posel the lady with her biyah.
What?
Anyone who, if their children would be pisulim, yeah, they would be posel the lady with her biyah. The Gemara later on is going to explain. We're not going to get to it today. The Gemara is going to explain these opinions. And we had this actually in Kiddushin, if you remember. And then kol she'en zaro pasul eno posel. Anyone who their offspring is not going to be pasul, they won't posel the lady with their biyah. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, he says kol she'ata noseh bito ata noseh al minuto. Anyone who you can marry their daughter, you can marry the almana, meaning the lady that they had biyah with is not pasul. Kol she'en ata noseh bito I ata noseh al minuto. But if you cannot marry their daughter, you cannot marry their almana, the lady that they had biyah with becomes pasul. So for what we're going to deal with today is just the drashot. So the Gemara says, Mina hani mili. How do I know this? Where's the pasuk in the Torah that says that if somebody pasul has biyah with a kohenet, she cannot eat truma anymore? Or has biyah with a Yisraelit, she cannot marry a kohen anymore? How do we know that? Where does it say that if a halal has biyah with or a mamzer has biyah with a Yisrael, with a bat kohen, she cannot have truma anymore? Or if he has biyah with a bat Yisrael, she cannot marry a kohen anymore?
Is the other way?
It's if a pasul has biyah with a lady who's a bat kohen, she cannot have truma. What do you mean the other way?
The lady has a biyah of whatever, biyah with the pasul man.
Yeah. That lady cannot. That's what we're talking about. The man is pasul.
If the man has a biyah with the pasul lady, so
that doesn't do anything. He doesn't not become a kohen anymore. He doesn't lose the ability to eat truma. Okay, so says the Gemara Minahani Mili. How do we know this? So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav says Amar Kara. It says in the pasuk Ubat kohen ki tiyeh leish zar. The pasuk says Ubat kohen ki tiyeh leish zar. When a bat kohen is tiyeh leish zar, she's with somebody who's a zar, who she's not allowed to. Literally what the pasuk means is she marries someone who's not a kohen. It says he b'trumat hakodoshim lo tochel. She cannot eat truma. So the Gemara makes a drasha from this pasuk. Kevan sheniv'ela lepasula pasla. Once she had biyah with somebody who's pasul to her, an ish zar who's pasul to her, pasla, she is pasul now, and she cannot eat truma anymore. So the Gemara question is, the Gemara says that pasuk cannot be the source. Why? We need that pasuk for something else. The Ka'amar Rachmana bat kohen de minsev alezar lo techol. It's teaching us that a bat kohen who marries someone who's not a kohen, she cannot eat truma. So this pasuk cannot be used to teach us that if she has biyah with someone who's pasul, she becomes pasul, because this pasuk is teaching us something else. It's teaching us that if she marries someone who's not a kohen, she cannot eat truma. So the Gemara says no. That halacha I learned from a different pasuk, and this pasuk is still available, right? Ha'i mi veshava el beit avia kin ureha milechem avia tochel nafka. There's another pasuk that says that if a bat kohen marries a Yisrael, and then she gets divorced or she becomes an almana, so she goes back to her father's house, she can eat truma. Sounds like when she was married, she wasn't allowed to eat truma. When she was married to the Yisrael, she wasn't allowed to eat truma. So we learn that from here.
She's not allowed.
Therefore, yes. So the point is, we learn that from this pasuk. Therefore, the pasuk of Ubat Kohen Ki Tiel Ishzar, we can learn that if someone has bia, if a lady has bia to someone who's pasul, she becomes pasul. From the fact that the Torah says after she becomes an almana or a grusha, she goes back to her father's house, the kohen, and she could eat truma. So that sounds like from the beginning, when she was married originally, she wasn't allowed to eat when she was married to the Israel. So we learn that from there. So the Gemara says no. If from that pasuk, all I would have is an aseh, because the pasuk says that it doesn't say she's not allowed to eat truma when she's married to Israel over there. It says once she gets divorced, she returns to her father's house and she could eat truma. So we understand from there that when she was married to the Israel, she wouldn't be allowed to eat truma, but it wouldn't be a lav, it would be an aseh, because the Torah doesn't say the word lo or al or anything like that. So therefore, kadav rachmana hay lelav. So therefore, we need the pasuk of Uvat Kohen, the original pasuk. We need that pasuk still to teach me about somebody who's married to a kohenet who's married to a Yisrael, that it's a lav for her to eat truma. So the Gemara says, lav mi v'kol zar lo yochal kodesh nafka. The lav we learn from the pasuk of kol zar lo yochal kodesh. So the Gemara says, no, even that pasuk, ha'um mibaya le'legufeh, that pasuk we also need it for itself to teach me that a regular zar, a regular person who's not a kohen, cannot eat truma. So the Gemara says, well, we have two psukim that say that, right? It says trei v'chol zar k'tivi. There's twice in the Torah that it says v'chol zar lo yochal kodesh, v'chol zar lo yochal bo. So the Gemara says, I still need both of them. We're going back and forth, right? Akati mibayale. I still need both of those psukim. Leked Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, to teach me what Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina teaches. Dam Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina v'chol zar zarut amarti lecha v'lo aninut. He basically has a drasha that the pasuk says v'chol zar to teach me that only a zar cannot have truma, but an onen kohen is able to have truma. He's technically kasher to have truma. So at this point, we started off with a pasuk, right? Ubat kohen. We wanted to prove the question, right? Just to keep track of what we're doing. What are we trying to find? We're trying to find the makor that someone who had bia, a lady who had bia with a man who's pasul, she becomes pasul, which means if she's a bat kohen, she cannot eat truma. If she's a Yisrael or a Levia, she cannot marry a kohen, right? Once she had bia with a pasul, yeah, she'll be with a mamzer. All these, she'll become a halal. All of these people who we mentioned, she had bia with a mamzer.
What kind of pasul she's gonna be?
She'll be pasul for truma or to marry a kohen. She'll be, the psul is a zona. No, to marry a kohen, the psul would be zona. It would be a psul of zona to marry a kohen, and it would be and she would be mechulelet from having truma if she was already a bat kohen. So we're going back and forth. We had this pasuk. We wanted to say the source is ubat kohen ki tiyeh leish zar, that if she has bia with somebody who is pasul, she becomes pasul. So the Gemara said, no, we need that pasuk for something else, and we learned that from somewhere else, back and forth. So we're still in the middle of this. So the Gemara says, we need it for Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara says, no, we learn Rabbi Yossi's halacha from a different place, and this pasuk is still available. The Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina mean zar v'chol zar nafka. We learned that from the pasuk of v'chol zar, the extra v'chol. That's where Rabbi Yossi learns his halacha of the onen is zar is zarut is pasul, onen aninut is mutar. So the Gemara says, okay, but still I have a problem. Va'akati mibayele. I still need this pasuk of v'chozar lekedetanya keshehi chozeret chozelet letruma ve'ena chozeret lechazeh v'shok. That there's a halacha that when a bat kohen was married to a Yisrael, and then she becomes an almana or a grusha, and she goes back to her father's house. So the pasuk says when she goes back to her father's house, she can eat truma. So we have a drasha, she's allowed to eat truma, but she's not allowed to eat from parts of the korbanot that generally the Kohen's family was able to eat from. right? The Kohen is allowed to certain parts of korbanot. The Kohen is allowed to bring home and feed his family or eat together with his family. So, in this situation where his daughter was married to Israel for a little bit, and then she became an almana or grusha, she comes back home. She's allowed to go back to eating truma, but not go back to eating those parts. And how do we know that? V'amar Rav Chisda amar Avina barav Shila. He says that Maikra, what's the pasuk that indicates this? Tichtiv ubat kohen ki tiyeh leish zar hi b'trumat hakadashim lo tochel. She cannot eat truma. So what do we see from there? That lo tochal b'mura min hakodashim. She cannot eat b'trumat hakodashim. Is b'mura min hakodashim, the items that are taken from kodesh, the parts of the korbanot. So therefore, the Gemara is questioning. You can't learn from the pasuk of ubat kohen ki tiyeh leish zar that if she had bia with someone who's pasuk, because we learn something else from this pasuk. We learn a halacha that when she goes back to her father's house after being married, she's not allowed to have the chazeh v'shok, those parts of the korbanot. So the Gemara says, no, imken lichtov kra hi b'kadoshim lo tochel. My b'trumat hakodashim. Shmad minatarti. So the Gemara says, if it's only coming to teach me that she cannot have parts of the korbanot, it could have just said, hi b'kodashim lo tochel. What does it mean, trumat hakodashim? Seems to indicate two things. That she cannot have truma or kodashim. So basically from this pasuk, we're learning two things. Why do you have
to mention truma? Why do you can't say anything that the Kohen is allowed to do it? She's not allowed to do it. That's it.
So because there's a difference. So the Gemara is saying two things. Number one is an actual bat Kohen who was married to a Yisrael. When she comes back, Shava el Beit Avia, she can return to her father's house and eat truma, but she's not allowed to have parts of the korbanot. That she's not allowed. She can eat truma, but she cannot eat parts of the korbanot. That we have a drasha.
Korban Pesach,
No, not korban pesach. Certain things that the chazeh v'shok of, I believe Rashi says of certain shlamim. Rashi chazeh v'shok of shlamim that the kohen usually would be able to feed his family. She cannot have after she was married to a Yisrael and she became an almana or a grusha. And the other thing we're learning from the pasuk of uvat kohen ki tiyeh leish zar is what we originally wanted to learn, that if someone who's pasul has bia with bat kohen, she can no longer have truma. She becomes nifsala, she becomes psula in terms of if she's a bat kohen, she cannot have truma anymore. So the Gemara says, okay, fine. So ashkechan kohenet. We find by a kohenet, you found me a proof. The proof is this pasuk. From this pasuk we learn that if a pasul has bia with a kohenet, she can no longer have truma. She becomes pasul to have truma. Great. But Leviya v'Yisraelit minalan. We include in the Braita also that if this pasul has bia with a Leviya or a Yisraelit, with a lady who's a bat Levi or a bat Yisrael, that if a pasul has bia with them, they also become pisulim and they cannot marry a kohen. So where do we see that from this pasuk? So the Gemara says, Keda'amar Rabbi Abba Amar Rav Bat Uvat. We have in a different place Rabbi Abba. He says in the name of Rav from the extra vav. It says bat. It says Uvat Kohen. Could have just said Bat Kohen. It says Uvat Kohen. The extra vav is coming to include even a Bat Yisrael and a Bat Levi. So the Gemara says, Hachanami, Bat Uvat. Over here also, we use the same drasha. So the Gemara says, Keman, who is this drasha? Who makes this drasha? That from the extra Vav, we include we include a Yisraelit and a Kohenet. So the Gemara says, Kerebi Akiva. This goes like Rabbi Akiva, the Darish Vavim, that he makes drashot out of extra letter Vav. So the Gemara says, not necessarily is it going only according to Rabbi Akiva. Says the Gemara, Afil Tema Rabbanan. I could even tell you that it's going according to Rabbanan. Kule ubat kira yeterahu. The whole pasuk of uvat, the whole word of uvat kohen, it's all extra because the previous psukim were talking about the offspring of a kohen. So the pasuk could have just said ki tiyeh leish zar if she marries somebody who's. It didn't even need to say bat kohen because we already know we're talking about bat kohen. So from the fact that it says bat kohen, the whole thing, the whole pasuk is extra. Therefore, it's coming to include even bat Yisrael and a bat Levi. So the Gemara says, okay, so ashkechan litruma, fine, but this pasuk is talking about that if they have bia with somebody pasul, it makes them pesulim to have truma. So that's for truma, but lekehuna minalan. How do we see that they're not allowed to marry a kohen? That you don't see in the pasuk. So the Gemara says, no, it's very simple. Atu leviav Yisraelit, lo lekehuna marbinan lehu. Of Levi and Israelite, what are we gonna do? We're saying, oh, they're not allowed to eat truma if they have bia with someone who's pasul. What do you mean? They're not allowed to eat truma anyways, right? Di truma benot mechal truma ninhu. If you're coming to teach me that they're pasul to have truma, they're benot mechal truma. They're not people who can have truma. So the Gemara says, yes, they can. I'm gonna find you a case where they can have truma. Alama lo. Why are you saying they cannot have truma? Mishkach hadla. You can have a case of a Bat Yisrael, who she's really a Bat Yisrael. What happened? She got married to a Kohen, and the Kohen, she had children, and the Kohen was niftar, she became an almana. So she's allowed to have truma, because she's eating truma, because she has a son from the Kohen, and in such a case she eats truma. So you have a case of a Bat Yisrael who's eating truma. So this is what we're talking about. If she has that Bat Yisrael who's eating truma because she has a son from the Kohen, if she has bia with a pasul, it becomes pasul to eating truma. Maybe that's what we're talking about. But you don't necessarily see that a Bat Yisrael who has bia with someone who's pasul becomes pasul kehuna. How do we see that? Meaning, the Gemara is saying, if we can find a way to keep it that it's talking about truma, we have no proof that the Bat Yisrael will be pasul to marry a Kohen. Maybe it only makes her pasul to eat truma. And the case would be a Bat Yisrael is eating truma because she has a son from a Kohen. And and if she has bia with somebody who's pasul, it makes it that she cannot eat truma anymore.
Here she has a son?
Yeah. So that's, the Gemara says, maybe this is what we're learning.
We have a halacha that if she has a son, she never lose her
Yeah, but the assumption is she would be no different than a Bat Yisrael. A Bat Yisrael is a Bat Kohen. A Bat Kohen is allowed to eat truma. If she has bia with somebody pasul, that's it. She cannot eat truma. If she has bia with a mamzer, she cannot eat truma anymore. So we would assume that a Bat Yisrael who's eating truma because she has a child from a Kohen, she used to be married to a Kohen, so we would assume the same thing. If afterwards, her husband died and she's now eating truma because her son is a Kohen, so I would think that same thing. If she has bia with a mamzer or with a halal or with a natin or one of these people, she becomes pasul from eating truma also. So the Gemara says, no, I don't need a pasuk to teach me that she becomes pasul in eating truma in such a case. Why? Bishvil bena kal v'chomer. If a lady's eating truma because of her son, I have a kal v'chomer that she should stop eating truma if she had a bia with a pasul. Uma kohenet dibikdusha denavsha achla pasila kohenet, a bat kohen that she has her own kiddusha, she becomes pasul if she has bia with someone who's pasul, takes away from her own kedusha. Liviavi Yisraeli delo achla ela bishvil bena a Yisraelit and bat Levi, that she doesn't have her own kedusha. She's only eating truma because of her son. So lo kol shekain, for sure she should become pisula if she has bia with a pasul. So the Gemara says opposite. I'm going to tell you opposite svara. V'hi hanotenet. I'm going to tell you an opposite to that kal v'chomer. Kohenet de kadish gufa the bat kohen, she has her own kedusha, so therefore pasila. So the guy comes, has bia with her, it takes away her kedusha, it makes her pasul. Ha delo kadish gufa, but a bat Yisrael who she's not eating because she has a kedusha, she's eating because of her son. So lo pasila. If she has bia with somebody, so what if she has bia with somebody who's pasul? She's not eating because of her own kedusha. She's eating because her son's a kohen. Her son is still a kohen. Who cares if she had bia with somebody who's pasul? So that whole kal v'chomer is out the window. Therefore, we're back to square one. What's the source that if that a bat Yisrael who has bia with a pasul becomes pasul keuna? Maybe we need that pasuk of ubat kohen to teach me that a bat Yisrael who has bia with someone who's pasuk stops having truma if she has a son who's a kohen. So ella lekeuna. Rather, how do we know that a bat Yisrael cannot marry a kohen if she had bia with somebody who's pasul? Kal v'chomer migusha. We learned kal v'chomer from gerusha. What's the kal v'chomer? Uma gerusha shemuteret bitruma asura lekeuna. So a gerusha, someone who was married, a bat kohen, who was married to a Yisrael, and then she became a grusha now. So she's allowed to have truma, but she's not allowed to marry a kohen.
Say what again?
A grusha. She's allowed to eat truma.
Grusha.
Yes.
Cannot marry the kohen.
Right. So what do you see? She cannot marry a kohen, but she's allowed to eat truma. Meaning, let's say you have a case of a grusha who she was a bat kohen herself. She got married to Israel for a little bit, and then she became a grusha. So she
married Israel, not
or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who she married. She became a grusha. She herself was a bat kohen. She became a grusha. She's allowed to eat truma because she goes back to her father's house, and her father's a kohen. She's allowed to eat truma, but she's not allowed to marry a kohen. So what do you see? Because she's a grusha. Yeah. So what do you see? You see that a grusha doesn't become pasul from truma, but she becomes pasul from keuna. So if someone is pasul from truma, for sure they should be pasul from keuna. That's what you see. So says the Gemara, right? Ma grusha shemuteret b'truma asura lekeuna, zusha asura b'truma enodin shepesula lekeuna. If someone is pasul to if someone is muteret, if someone is pisula for truma, for sure she should be pisula for keuna. So the Gemara says, okay, but you can't bring v'chim azirin min adin. You can't make an isur from a kal v'chomer. So the Gemara says, gilui milta ba'almahi. It's not an isur that we're creating. It's a gilui milta, meaning there is an existing isur, and this is just revealing to us what's included in the isur. Okay, let's try to go a little bit further, just a few minutes to get to a good place to stop. So the Gemara says, ve'ema nivla la pasula chayve kritut. When it says someone who had bia with someone who's pasul, they become pasul. Maybe that means only if they had bia with chayve kritut, not necessarily a mamzer or natin or something that's a lav, but chayve kritut that makes her pasul. So the Gemara says, kitiya amar Rachmana hanach did behu havaya chayve kritut lav b'nei havaya. We're talking about kitiya. The pasuk kitiya. Kitiya means havaya. We're talking about pisulim that they could have kiddushin with her. So the Gemara says, Yihachi Oved Kochavim ve'Eved Livsilu. If that's the case, then Oved Kochavim and Eved, they cannot have Kiddushin with her, therefore they should not be posel her. If she has Bia with Oved Kochavim, shouldn't be posel her. So the Gemara says, Hanach Pasli mid Rabbi Ishmael. I have a different source. Rabbi Ishmael teaches that these make her pasul. Da'amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Ishmael Minayin Lo Oved Kochavim ve'Eved Shebal Bat Yisrael Val Kohenet V'Levia Shepaslua. How do we know that an Oved Kochavim and Eved, who was together with a Bat Yisrael Kasher or a Bat Kohen, they make her Pisula? Shneimar, it says in the Pasuk, Bat Kohen Kitiyeh Almana Ugrusha. Pasuk says that a Bat Kohen, if she becomes an Almana Ugrusha, then she goes back to her father's house and she eats Truma. But what do you see from that Pasuk? Mishiesh lo Amanut v'Gerushin ba. Only if she was together with somebody who it's shayach almanut and gerushin, which means it's shayach kiddushin. Yatsu oved kochavim ve'eved she'en lo almanut ve'gerushin. So that's coming to exclude an Oved Kochavim and a Eved, that they don't have any Almanut and Gerushin. There's no Kiddushin, there's no Havaya over there. So Ashkechan Kohenet, Leviya Yisrael Minalan. Okay, so from the pasuk you see Kohenet. How do we know to include Leviya and Yisraelit? So same way we did last time. Kida Amar Rabbi Abba Amar Rav Bat Uvat, from the extra word Uvat. So Hachanami Bat Uvat. The Gemara says Keman Rabbi Akiva Didarish Vave. This is going like Rabbi Akiva, who is Dorish Vav, from the extra Vav. So the Gemara says no. Afil Tim Rabbanan. I could even tell you according to Rabbanan. Kula uvat krayetera. This uvat also is all extra because the previous pasuk right beforehand says ubat kohen ki tiel ishzar, and then again it says ubat kohen ki tiel almana ugrusha. We already know we're talking about bat kohen. Why do you have to say the word? It's all extra. What's it extra for? It's coming to teach me that same would apply even to a bat Yisrael, and it would make her pasul to kehuna if she had bia with a oved kochavim or eved. One more line. So ve'ema mi sheyesh la amanut gerushin ba. Ki led lezera ka'achla, ki lezera lo achla. Why don't we learn the pasuk like this? That only someone who has almanut and gerushin to her, meaning someone who is shayach kiddushin and gerushin, that's when, if she has zera from him, if she has children from him, then, right, if she has children from a Yisrael, kasher basically, right, well, if she doesn't have zera from him, then she goes back to her father's house and eats. Right? The whole pasuk is saying, "Ubat kohen kitiyeh almana ugrusha." If she becomes almana ugrusha and she doesn't have zera, then she goes back to her father's house. So maybe what it's saying is like this: that if mishi yesh lo almanut v'gerushin ba, if she was married to Yisrael, she had bia with Yisrael, someone who's kasher to her. Ki leid lezera ka'achla. If she doesn't have any children from him, she eats. Ki lezera lo achla. If she does have children, then she doesn't eat truma when she goes back to her father's house because she has children from the Israel. Misha ein lo almanut v'gerushin ba. But if she's with an akum, someone who doesn't have almanut and gerushin to her, someone who's not shayach kiddushin to her, afagav deid lezera nami techol. Even if she has zera from him, maybe that zera doesn't count as anything, and she could still go back to her father's house and eat truma. Maybe that's what the pasuk is teaching us. So Gemara says, "Imken ribui leviva Yisrael lamali." If that's the case, then it would only be talking about a bat kohen who goes back to her father's house. There would be no need to include Yisraelit from the pasuk uvat, to include a Yisraelit and a Leviya. The fact that it's including a Yisraelit and a Leviya teaches me that the drasha is coming to tell me that if she had bia with even a oved kochavim or an eved, that would make her pasul. Okay, so we have to stop here. Getting very, very late.
Very, very, very late.